On May 1st, Shell and its partners approved a decision that may permanently reshape Canada's energy future. They committed hundreds of millions of Canadian dollars to move forward with LNG Canada's Phase 2 expansion in Kitimat, British Columbia. The move placed substantial financial backing behind what Premier David Eby described as the largest private sector investment in Canadian history. The final investment decision is scheduled for the end of 2026. Asia is facing a severe natural gas shortage after damage to Qatar's Ras Laffan facility during the Iran war. On May 1st, every partner in the venture approved hundreds of millions of dollars in additional funding to continue preparations for the final investment decision. The financing will support more engineering work tied to the Phase 2 expansion. It will also allow the possible ordering of long lead equipment, specialized systems that require years to manufacture and must be secured early to prevent construction delays. The funding will also advance agreements with First Nations communities along the pipeline route. Commercial contracts throughout the supply chain will continue moving forward as well. Construction activity at LNG Canada's marine offloading terminal in Kitimat will also progress. This was not symbolic. Companies do not spend hundreds of millions of dollars on engineering, equipment procurement, and active construction work unless they are serious about building the project. The investment is real. The commitment is real. And the deadline is now tied to the federal-provincial agreement signed on May 14th. Phase 1 of LNG Canada is already operating in Kitimat. The facility exports liquefied natural gas through 2 processing trains, with a combined output capacity of about 14 million tons per year. The gas supply comes from the Montney Formation near Dawson Creek in northeastern British Columbia, one of the largest natural gas reserves in North America. It travels through the Coastal GasLink pipeline before reaching the export terminal. Phase 2 would introduce 2 additional processing trains. That expansion would double total export capacity to roughly 28 million tons annually. Some projections estimate the total could reach as high as 30 million tons each year. At current LNG market prices, the expanded operation could generate approximately 40 billion Canadian dollars in export revenue every year once fully operational. Even Phase 1 alone, with 14 million tons of annual capacity, already places LNG Canada among the largest LNG export facilities on Earth. Phase 2 would push it into the top 3 worldwide. In a single project, at one site on the northern coast of British Columbia, Canada would move from being a relatively small LNG exporter to becoming a major global energy power. The timing of this commitment in May 2026 is the most critical part of the story. Asia's urgency cannot be understood without examining what happened in Qatar. Ras Laffan. Industrial City in Qatar is the world's largest LNG export complex. Under normal conditions, it processes and exports approximately 77 million tons of LNG each year. That accounts for more than 1/3 of global LNG trade. This happened while Qatar's production remained disrupted, and Asian buyers were paying premium prices for dependable non-Russian energy supply. At the same time, Trans Mountain has been operating near maximum capacity, moving Canadian oil toward many of those same Asian markets. If Phase 2 receives approval before the end of this year, another 14 million tons of LNG export capacity would be added annually. The timing aligns directly with Asian buyers searching for stable long-term contracts beyond the Middle East. Shell, Petronas, PetroChina, Mitsubishi, and Korea Gas are not committing hundreds of millions of dollars to preliminary development because they believe the opportunity is small. They are moving forward. because customers across Asia are signaling strong demand and a willingness to secure contracts once the project is built. There is one figure that stands out clearly. At full phase, to production, LNG export revenue could reach 40 billion Canadian dollars every year. Last year, Canada's total goods exports to all international markets were approximately $680 billion. LNG Canada operating at full scale would account for roughly 6% of the total from one facility located in a single town on the northern coast of British Columbia, exporting primarily to Asia rather than the United States. That is what energy diversification looks like once the infrastructure is actually completed. The government side of this story is equally important. On May 14th, the Government of Canada and the Government of British Columbia signed an enhanced investment cooperation agreement with LNG Canada. Under the agreement, both governments committed to working together with LNG Canada and First Nations communities to advance Phase 2 and target a final investment decision before the end of 2026. Federal Energy Minister Tim Hodgson announced the agreement alongside British Columbia Premier David Eby in Vancouver. The announcement came in the same city where Eby had recently opposed Carney's proposed West Coast oil pipeline only days earlier. On LNG Canada, however, Eby and Carney are completely aligned. Eby described Phase 2 as a generational opportunity. He also stated that he hoped the final investment decision would arrive before the end of the year. If the project moves ahead, he said it would become the largest private sector investment in Canadian history. The agreement between governments matters because it reduces the regulatory uncertainty that stopped earlier Canadian energy developments. LNG Canada Phase 2 has now been referred to the Federal Major Projects Office. This is the same accelerated approval system created by Carney for the West Coast oil pipeline. Both federal and provincial governments have formally committed themselves to advancing the project. The regulatory route is now clearly defined. The agreement also specifically states that economic benefits must reach First Nations communities along the pipeline corridor and at the Kitimat terminal. During construction of Coastal GasLink, this issue caused major delays and conflict. Now, those commitments are formally built into the process from the start, rather than added later. The Coastal GasLink experience demonstrated the importance of handling Indigenous consultation correctly from the beginning. What separates LNG Canada Phase 2 from many previous Canadian energy projects is that the operator already exists and is already functioning. Shell is not considering whether to enter Canada's energy market. The company already completed Phase 1. It already operates the pipeline system. It already controls the marine terminal. It already maintains working relationships with First Nations communities, holds approvals connected to the site, and serves an established customer network across Asia. Phase 2 is not a completely new development beginning from zero. It is an expansion built onto infrastructure that is already functioning. That difference matters. One is a proposal on paper. The other is an active construction platform. LNG Canada is also tied closely to the CUSMA negotiations, even if the connection is not immediately obvious. Canada's strongest position during the CUSMA talks depends on one central argument. The country has alternatives, alternative buyers for Canadian oil, alternative destinations for natural gas, alternative markets for critical minerals. Every infrastructure project directed toward Asia instead of the United States strengthens that position. LNG Canada Phase 1 is already exporting natural gas into Asian markets. Phase 2 would double that export capability. Alongside Trans Mountain oil shipments and the proposed West Coast oil pipeline, Canada is constructing an export network that can remain economically sustainable without relying entirely on American customers. This is not about threats, it is about infrastructure. Once infrastructure is completed, it becomes permanent. American trade negotiators understand that reality clearly. Every LNG cargo departing Kitimat for Tokyo represents supply that no longer depends on moving south. Every barrel shipped through Trans Mountain toward a refinery in China is a barrel no longer controlled exclusively by refineries in the American Midwest. As Canada expands more export infrastructure aimed at Asia, Washington's leverage weakens, regardless of what happens at the CUSMA table on July 1st. There are also limits that remain important. Shell's commitment of hundreds of millions of dollars for preliminary development is significant, but it is not yet the final investment decision. The official FID is expected before the end of 2026. Before that point arrives, the joint venture still must complete engineering work, finalize agreements with Indigenous communities, secure long-term shipping contracts with Asian buyers, and confirm that the economics remain favorable at projected LNG prices. Any one of those issues could slow the process or prevent the final investment decision entirely. The tanker moratorium along British Columbia's north coast applies to crude oil tankers, but LNG carriers are excluded. LNG Canada's Kitimat terminal already operates under that exemption. Because of this, Phase 2 does not face the same tanker moratorium barrier confronting the West Coast oil pipeline. That advantage is significant. Environmental opposition also remains real. The Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment criticized Phase 1's emissions performance, pointing out that the facility exceeded authorized monthly emission limits during several months. Phase 2 would double those emissions levels. British Columbia's climate commitments and LNG Canada's expansion plans are now in direct tension. That issue will need active management rather than avoidance. The projection of 40 billion Canadian dollars in yearly revenue is also based on current LNG market prices. Energy markets remain volatile. If global LNG conditions stabilize after Qatar's recovery and a ceasefire involving Iran, the financial case supporting Phase 2 could weaken. The economics appear strong today. They must remain strong throughout construction and beyond. The core facts remain straightforward. On May 1st, Shell and 4 Asian energy partners committed hundreds of millions of dollars to continue advancing LNG Canada's Phase 2 expansion. On May 14th, Canada and British Columbia signed a formal agreement targeting a final investment decision before the end of 2026. The facility already exists. Operations are already underway. LNG shipments are already moving to Asia. Regulatory approvals are already in place. The pipeline already exists. The marine terminal is already operating. Qatar's Ras Laffan facility remains damaged and recovery continues slowly. Asian buyers are paying premium prices for dependable non-Russian LNG supply. Shell's Asian partners, Petronas, PetroChina, Mitsubishi, and Korea Gas, are not supporting Phase 2 because they expect weak demand. They are investing because they understand their customers need the supply Kitimat can provide. If the final investment decision arrives before year-end as planned, Canada will move forward with the largest private sector project in its history at the exact moment global energy markets need it most. Share your thoughts and stay updated on every major development shaping Canada's energy future. Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.